Shalom, welcome. This is Avraham Shira from Eretz Israel. Today we have a very special class I've been preparing for quite a while because it combines a lot of ideas that we find in the Kabbalah, in Chazal, in the Tanach. And so it's been a process of collation of information and material because it's so prevalent and important to us today. The title of the class should give us a little idea, right? Kavod, the virus. Kavod, glory, counting, and the Kabbalah of Shabbat. All these concepts paint a world to us that are going to explain a lot of things. Now, the first thing we're going to begin with is this idea of why is the Torah so against counting people? King David, the greatest king, the greatest servant, the greatest poet, warrior, everything, all the honors are given to this man, and yet he is punished for counting the people by a plague striking his people. And there are other cases and instances in the Torah where people count people and there are plagues. But this great symbol of Jewish humility and creativity and statesmanship, warriorship, etc., is brought down by a plague for counting. So we got to ask, what is so bad about counting? Okay, you can say, well, counting people is not a good thing. And we know there's many reasons. We're going to talk about why counting people is not the same as counting oranges and apples and bank accounts. Now, the idea of counting in Kabbalah is another whole level of understanding. So bear with me, we're going to take it step by step, and you will see that we're going to go to a place of new understanding. So counting, of course, is first of all is an act of measuring. And Kabbalah, measuring means you're bringing din, judgment, onto an unprescribed element. It's unspecified until you count the item. Now you'll notice this is true because children, when you give them some coins, when they're old enough to understand money, the first thing they want to do is count that money. They want to know how much is there. That, my friends, is coming from the left side of what we call the tree of life, the side of din. It's innocent, it's beautiful, is he a child learning to count, etc. But when it comes to money, you and I know that it's not so innocent. So first thing about counting is a form of measurement. But when you measure something, what are you doing? You're giving it a number. A number is a name. Okay? My name is Avraham, your name is Danny, your name is Shlomo. We all have names. A number is also a name. It's not a name in the human context of discourse and social life. It's a name that refers to mathematical precision. But it is giving a name. And what does that do? Well, it gives a place in the mind. When you have something that has a number, you're giving it a place in the human mind. When I have a pocket full of money and I don't know how much is there, what do I have? I have a vague idea. It is not rooted strongly in my mind until I know its number. So keep this idea in mind. That when you count something, you're giving it a name and you're giving it a place in the human consciousness. And the place of human consciousness is an extremely sensitive place. In the war between good and evil, in the war between left and right in Kabbalah, in the battle between Torah and anti-Torah, if you will. Now that paradigm can be stretched in any direction you want. Holy and unholy, pure and impure, kosher and unkosher. The paradigm is very long, but that's okay. Just understand this about counting. And when you give numbers to things, you're labeling them. You're giving it a label. Oh, I'm from New York. We have 10 million people. Another guy says, oh, I'm from, some small town in Alabama, and he's got 500 people in his town. What happens? I'm from New York, the great city. We have 10 million people. We're using numbers to manipulate our position, okay? Which is an act of trying to gain power, influence. When I tell you I have $1 million, it represents something. It represents power. It represents a position. And that is an attempt to manipulate. And that is also an act of din, of judgment. And it can be called negativity very, very easily. Okay. So remember this about naming and numbering. And by the way, this is why in the halakha says we shouldn't count our money unless you need to know how much you have to buy something. You don't just count money stam. We know the famous story about one of the Rothschilds who went into his safe to count his money and he didn't come out. He closed the door and locked himself in there and didn't tell anybody that he was there. And he starved to death. That sounds kind of like a legend, but if you look it up, it's told in Sfarim by rabbis that I hold to be honest. Okay? We do not count money unless you need to know how much I need to go to the store, to go to buy a car, to buy a house. But just to count money because it's fun, I'm still a kid counting coins. No, that's negative. That brings in negative energy. Din. Okay? And din is going to be at the root of another idea that we're going to talk about when we get to this virus. All right. Now, the beginning of the Torah gives us a pasuk, ki nefesh chayahu shmo, that the living soul of something is its name. This is all across Torah and Hasidic literature. The name is a living soul. Now, how can that be? You know, a name is a combination of sounds that comes out of your mouth, or rings in your head, or you write it on a paper. But how does that make it a living soul? Well, we say that the entire Torah is God's name. The entire Torah is Hashem spelling His name into the world constantly and renewing the world with His name. So we're going to take this a little further. A name is a reputation. And your reputation precedes you because your reputation is an energy field of what you've created in the world. What you do in the world creates energy. That energy gets a name in other people's minds. Remember, numbers take a place in your mind, and so do names. Oh, that's Avraham. That's Sarah. That's Yosef. That name carries a reputation. And that reputation is an energy field which actually contains a part of your essence. Because you made it. And since you made it from your essence, it's very vulnerable. It's very sensitive material. And since if you're a religious Jew and you wear the kippah and you have the beard and the whole story, then you carry God's name on your back and in your heart, hopefully, and in your mind. So that takes it to another level altogether. So understand, giving a name is extracting the essence of a thing. So when Adam was first commanded in the garden to give names to all the animals, and by the way, Eve was there with him at the time, inside him, they were still one. According to the linear reading of the Torah, they were still one. They were hermaphrodite when Adam and Eve got the command to call the names of the creatures. And what they were calling those names, they were extracting the essence of every being in Hebrew letters. So those Hebrew letters are conduits of living power. They're not just static ideas on a page. So now when we take that approach to understanding naming, and understand that counting is a part of naming, we can understand a little bit more how important counting is. Now, when you count something, you can disregard its name. That's Joe and Bob and Moshe, etc., etc. Ah, there's 10 guys here, let's have a minyan. I'm no longer interested in Bob and Joe and Moshe. I'm interested in my minyan. I need those 10 guys so I can pray, say Kaddish. That's a good thing, it's a Torah thing. But I'm still, you see what happens? When you take a person from his name, his essence, and put him in a numbered category, you reduce him, you diminish him a tiny bit. But that tiny bit is an opening to din. Again, the act of counting is measuring, and that's din. When I say, if I measure my child's height, I'm putting a number on his height. Why? Well, because I want to see how he's growing. Why? Well, because I want to see if he's healthy. Well, okay, that's a legitimate thing for a parent to want to know. Or maybe I want to know if he's going to be tall enough for the NBA. I don't know. But as parents, we know, right? And we have to be careful. If I tell my kid to get on the scale and tell him he's overweight, he's going to have a complex that he's fat. It's not necessarily fat. But putting them on the scale puts an act of din on the child's psyche. And if I call you by a number, I'm putting you down. And that's exactly why the Nazis put numbers on people's arms. Why did they need to go to that trouble? Why was it important? For that matter, why is it important? If I go to the conference of mayors, I show up, oh, my city has 10,000 people. Another guy says, 10,000, that's nothing. I'm the mayor of 100,000. And the next mayor shows up, oh, I'm the mayor of 1,000,000. It becomes an ego trip. And that's the din, again. Okay, and so on it goes. Now, what's the part of the problem, it's not just people's egos, that they use numbers for egos. They use numbers to influence. If I tell you my book has sold 1,000 copies, you say, oh, that's nice, Avraham. And if I say 1,000,000 copies, you say, wow, it must be special. So again, numbers are used to manipulate. Another aspect of din. And who are we manipulating? We're manipulating creatures that were created by God. You better have a real good, holy reason to manipulate somebody, because you're manipulating God's creations. Who gives you that right? Who gives you that power? The Torah says you don't have that right. You don't have that power to count human beings. And if you do, oy vavoy, just like King David, the greatest of the great. He brought on a plague that cost maybe more than 100,000 lives. And certainly all the people that survived weren't too happy afterwards either. So understand how far this goes. We are not allowed to count people because they carry God's name, if they're Jews especially. And any human being is a child of God. How many likes did you get? How many hits did you get? Etc., etc. You see how far we can take this. Okay, but what is the problem with the counting, my friends, is that it opens up a place for the negative side to attack. And that's exactly where the virus comes from. The virus is in the world. There are thousands of viruses that don't touch anybody or hurt anybody. Animals carry them around inside them all the time. And we're not necessarily prone to them. But if human beings twist the kavod of human beings, if we manipulate and count and put down and use the numbers of people for the wrong reasons, I turn the kavod in Hebrew, kaf, vav, kaf bet vav dalid, kavod, I turn it into COVID. I twist the vowels. And when you twist the vowels in the holy language, you twist the meaning. You invert the meaning. You take kavod and make it kovid. And that brings on the opening in the din, and in comes the virus. And we know this also because the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva that died were told that they did not have honor for each other, and so therefore a plague came and wiped them out. Now everybody asks, how could that be? The students of Rabbi Akiva, the humblest of the humble, the pious of the pious. Rabbi Akiva, his students. There's a lot of opinions about this, but for our purposes here to understand further how far this goes, that when we pogea, when we defect and we insult the honor of human beings, we open ourselves up to the permutation of kavod becomes COVID. And that becomes the opening where the virus comes in. And the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, the rabbis say, well, what was so bad? They were good Jews. They were religious Jews. They learned Torah. They prayed. What was so bad that all of a sudden they have to die? 24,000? It sounds like a pretty mean God up there in heaven. No, God is not mean. God is straight and true and fair. And he gives us the keys to the kingdom. And he says, here, run my kingdom. Guard the garden. Keep the garden. I want you to be like me. I want you to take over the running of the earth. I want you to be the masters of the creation. But there's a price to become a master of creation. You have to run it right. You can't mess around with this ecosystems. You can't mess around with every species unless you know exactly what you're doing, and you have to have divine inspiration to know that. Otherwise, you're gonna muck it up, you know. And what happened? Of course, the rabbis say, well, the students of Rabbi Akiva, why they died from a virus is because they did not honor each other's Torah. Now that is a heavy statement. What does it mean? We don't honor the other guy's Torah. Well, that's because my Torah is the special Torah and not yours. And I'm not going to stand up for you when you enter the room. Who are you? And the rabbis are very strict about this. They say, Ma tipsha'e elu shekamim lesefer Torah velo letalmid hacham. Stupid are the people that stand up for a Sefer Torah and don't stand up for a Talmid Hacham, because he's a living Torah. He has the whole thing inside him, in his mind and his heart. Okay, again, it's that attack on personal honor. And we're so insecure, about our own honor that we can't possibly honor somebody else. Now, any thinking person is going to say, wait a minute, Avraham, we need to count people. We have to take taxes. We have to build roads. We need to know how many schools we need. We have populations moving here and there, and we have to manage the populations, and we have to feed them, and we have to clothe them. You have to count people. How can you not? The Torah gives us a solution. It's a wonderful little loophole. You might laugh at it. You might even think, wait a minute, what is this loophole? Well, we see it by the Beit HaMikdash. Before Pesach, the rabbis want to know how many korbanot are going to be needed for Pesach. You're talking about, you could have just 2 million people show up for the barbecue. What do? So each one brings a half shekel. Whether he's rich or he's poor, he gives a half shekel. It goes into what's called Bedek Habayit, the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash. That money gets counted, and then we know, give or take, except for a few wooden nickels, they used to have those, right? That we know how many people, more or less, we need to supply with korbanot. How many people are going to be in Jerusalem for the festival? So they're not really counting people, they're counting money, which is mutar. It's permitted because it's a mitzvah. So with that in mind, we see that the Torah is very smart. God is extremely smart and much more insightful than we could ever hope to be. But that's okay. But we need to respect and understand that the Torah is not just giving us more burdens to do. You can't count people. Count their money, count their coin, count their cars. Well, we understand why. Because when I count you, I'm putting you down. And even if I don't mean to do it, it comes out that way. And that put down makes the opening for this terrible thing that we see by Rabbi Akiva's students, by the generation of King David, etc., etc. Now, why would I want to manipulate with numbers? Of course, because I want power. I want more money. You know, I go to the bank for a mortgage, I want to show them I've got money. Or show them that I have, if I want a business loan. So that sounds pretty legit, but not if it's used wrongly. Not if I use the power of numbers to influence people in the wrong way. And that brings us, my friend, to statistics. And how statistics are used by people today in the media. How do you feel every morning when you put on your iPhone and you turn it on Google, and the first thing they give you is today's corona count? How does that make you feel? Do you smile? Do you feel like going to shul that day? Do you feel like going to work? Do you want to say good morning to your spouse? You want to hug your kids? I don't know. It makes me upset. People are not made to know these things. These are godly numbers. People are not made to know how many died from this and this and this and this, because we reduce the people. How many people died from COVID? Well, look how many died from cancer, from car accidents, from alcoholism, all the different things that people can die from every day. Millions of people die. But we're not getting those numbers, are we? We're getting the COVID numbers. Because we twisted the Kavod. We took the Kavod out of heaven a long time ago. We took God out of school, you took honor out of heaven. And the rest is downhill from there. So we're not trying to wipe out counting here, folks. We need to count. But what we need to do more is to be in touch with why. And of course, you want to pay your debts, you need to know how much. Maybe you forgot, maybe you didn't write it down. Maybe somebody made a mistake at the market and charged you more. Anything could happen. So we need to count. We're not counting people. The Gemara says a human being is an entire world. How can you count an entire world? Do you think you know what 1,000 people is? You've gone to, let's say you went to the Rose Bowl. You saw 100,000 people sitting in that stadium watching a football game. Do you know what 100,000 people is? Well, it seems kind of big, yeah, But there's a traffic jam outside after the game. But okay, we'll get over it. 100,000 people is nothing compared to 1 million people. A 100,000 people is really beyond our mind to conceive of that entity, that mass of spiritual godly power, because every person in that group has a godly soul. And you multiply that by 10, you have 1 million. You multiply that by another 1,000, you have 1 billion. We take numbers for granted. We don't understand the power. Why do they tell you something costs $1.99, a shekel 99? Because they understand the power of numbers. It's all a psych job. Nobody pays attention to the last penny, but somehow it makes you feel a little better. That somehow is coming from the din also. from the side of constriction, from the side of smallness. From the side of lack. Exactly what the Yetzer Hara, with the evil inclination, with all his names and all his jobs and all his evil angels that are out there working day and night, that's what they want us to feel. Some kind of lack. I'm not good enough. The world's not good enough. The planet's not good enough. It's endless. But, you know, as Torah Jews, we have a solution. That's the great part. We have a solution that wipes it all out in one split second. What is that split second? Now remember, your mind is your greatest gift. It is greater than anything else because without your mind, you don't exist. Your mind is the place where your soul appears in this world. And so your mind, if your mind is that precious, do you want to rent out places in your mind just to any old thing? Do you just let anybody rent a bedroom in your house? So why do I let advertisers rent a room in my mind? Why do I let Facebook rent space in my brain? And why do I let the statisticians from the WHO have a whole lobby in my brain? Every morning I'm getting that information. It doesn't mean I shouldn't have compassion and feel loss. Of course we should. Every day we remember that in the Torah, in the davening. All the people that are suffering and that are lost. But it's in the wrong context, you see. It's not in the context of prayer. It's not in the context of attachment to a creator who can fix things. It's a context of numbers to manipulate our feelings and our thoughts. And those are the most precious things you have. So what is the solution? Well, of course, the solution is Shabbat. How? Well, because on Shabbat, we don't count. We don't count brownies. We don't count people, of course. We already learned that. We don't even measure the amount of water I put in the cup for my tea. I put the water in, put the tea in, etc. We don't measure. No measuring, folks, on Shabbat. Why? Because it's coming from that side of lack. It's coming from that side of measurement, of din. And Shabbat is all about the expanse, the greatness, the openness, the wonder, the imprecision of all these little physical details. We don't need them on Shabbat. Because Shabbat is me'ein olam haba. The Shabbat is an aspect of the world to come. In the world to come, there's no counting. There's no comparing. In the world to come, I don't have to tell the guy I spent more money on my car than you. In the world to come, I don't have to tell him I ate a bigger steak. Or my mansion had more square meters. In the world to come, there's no measurement at all. Except the light of your soul. And the rabbis teach us that the chuppah of a person's soul, which is his aura, the energy field of godliness that carries around, that carries you around, really, that we carry around, that stays with you when you leave your body after 120. And that's how souls are graded in heaven. The greater your light. And the greater your light in heaven, the more access you have to the upper places. So, when we look at Shabbat from this perspective, we should have a little bit of rest, a little menucha, right? We should have a little bit of, thank God, I can let go of the numbers. I cannot hear more information that I can't do anything with. But we can turn it into prayer. Prayer for our families, prayer for our communities, prayer for the world, prayer for the good and the evil. Because the evil is just inverted, twisted good. Okay? Now there's a level where the evil has to go down its own road. But the rabbis say if you have a friend who's gone off the path, you should chase him 70 years to try to bring him back. Now, that's a long time and a lot of chasing. If a guy doesn't want to be, if the guy doesn't want to come back to your class in yeshiva, what are you going to do? But it's giving us a bit of an exaggerated statement, a hyperbole, in order to show us how great it is to bring people closer to Hashem. And Shabbat is the greatest tool for all of that. If you want to bring somebody closer to Hashem, give them a Shabbat. Give them a day of rest. Give them 3 beautiful meals. Give them words of Torah, songs, joy, laughing. A few jokes help too, Whatever it takes. And Shabbat, it's here, it's coming, right here in Eretz Yisrael. And I hope all of you have a wonderful Shabbat as well. I hope this class has been helpful in understanding some of the things that are happening, because we are here for much greater things than we're being shown. Okay, and they're being hidden from us in order to raise our desire for holiness, for goodness, for justice. And if our desire is small, God doesn't show his cards. But if our desire is great, he shows us himself. He shows us his name. He shows us that force field of reputation. The Ramchal calls it a burning fire of awe. Comes down on you. So, okay, let's keep the fire in control. But really, Shabbat is here. And we should all be blessed to receive that peace, that inner joy that pushes all those numbers away, and all that counting, and all that COVID, and all that fear, and all that manipulation, just outside. It's not part of my life. It doesn't have any right to my brain at all. Because your brain is a holy place for the presence of God. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next week on all the platforms. All the best.